have anything to say.
What should I?
What? I guess the question I had at the very beginning is why this play? Why this story? So you can start there.
Okay. Well, it started out on a train ride across Montana about 8 years ago. I was headed to Seattle, and I got a deal on the Empire Builder, so I got like a really cheap sleeper car, and decided to travel in style that way. And in the sleepers, they have a little guidebook that points out points of interest out of the window, and one of those points of interest was Shelby, Montana. And it was a paragraph, about 3 sentences, describing what had happened in Shelby in 1923 when Jack Dempsey was to fight Tommy Gibbons, and it said that his manager canceled the fight and bankrupted the town. And I just found that to be intriguing and thought, well, I think there might be a play in that. When I got to Seattle, I walked into the bookstore at the University of Washington and saw a book about Jack Dempsey, just right there in front of me. It was Roger Kahn's biography called A Flame of Pure Fire, about Dempsey and his times, Dempsey in the 20s. So I bought it and read it on the train back. And by the time I got to Chicago, I was sold that I wanted to write a play about Jack Dempsey. I found him to be just a fascinating figure, and all the characters surrounding him, these sort of larger-than-life figures. And I felt that there was a lot in this story that resonated with our culture today. And so I felt that it wasn't really a museum piece. It had a lot to say about America, not just in the 20s, but in the 21st century.
Okay, so any folks have any questions about the play, about anything happens in the play, anything like that?
Or Jack Dempsey, or anybody, yes.
Can you speak a little bit? I mean, the style of the dialogue is a little reminiscent to me of maybe movies in the 1930s, the front page, things like that. Like there's a fast, there's a rat-a-tat-tat
Right.
quality to it,
Right.
a brassiness. Can you speak to maybe why that choice as opposed to something that is maybe a little more seems, more like contemporary or naturalistic?
Yeah, I guess because that's sort of the way it hit me. I grew up reading Damon Runyon stories, and as I started to do the research, and I realized that Damon Runyon was a figure in the story, that he actually covered the fight when he was in Shelby. And I went to the Library of Congress and dug out some of his columns and his coverage of the fight. And it just struck me as sort of a kind of a screwball comedy. That's the way it hit me in the story, and so it was sort of an homage to those old style plays and movies from the 30s and 40s with these kind of brassy, fast-talking characters and these kind of crazy situations. And it just seemed to fit the story, and so I decided that that's what that world was.
Other questions people have?
I have a
You're all
question.
dumbstruck.
There you go.
So can you talk a little bit about your relationship to the character of Nessa as sort of coming from, a woman entering this sort of sports writing world, and then, how that relates to you sort of entering the world of boxing. I don't know if you were a boxing fan before or what have you.
No, I wasn't a boxing fan. Actually, I remember I grew up when I was coming up, and I probably shouldn't say this because it will date me, but the boxer that everybody loved to hate at that time was Muhammad Ali. And I remember watching my father watching the fights on TV, and in those days they were televised. I think they were, and I remember one of these fights. It might have been with Joe Frazier, and I just ran from the room screaming, "Oh my God, turn it off, turn it off." I couldn't stand to watch these guys hitting each other. And then when I started reading about Dempsey, and this is many years later, a different perspective, I started to see it from a different light. Just the sheer nerve that it takes to go into a boxing match like that, and the strategy you have to bring into it. And I began to read about it and realize how much these guys really had. They were thinking. It wasn't just. That's really what distinguishes it, from a brawl in the street. It's not coming from emotion. They're not angry at each other. It's a strategy, and they're thinking the whole time, and they're plotting it out before they go into the ring, and while they're in the ring, how they're going to defeat their opponent. And it began then I was fascinated by that, and then I started, the glory of YouTube now, of course, is that all these fights and the Gibbons matches on YouTube, so you can see it. I watched the Willard match, or what excerpts I could find, and it's really astonishing when you watch Dempsey just totally demolish Jess Willard. He just completely demolishes this guy who's easily a foot bigger than him. And I just found a lot to respect there. There's the second part of your question.
Oh, how that experience sort of relates to the character of Nessa, if it
The character of
does.
Nessa. Well, I guess I really became intrigued by her because in Roger Kahn's book, he talks about her as a figure. She actually was a female, she was really a fashion writer and an illustrator who covered boxing matches. She covered the Carpentier fight from the woman's perspective, and she wrote a lot about their clothes and their musculature and their legs and so forth. And there's a line in the, so when she went to the fight and watched the Carpentier match, she was so overcome she fainted. But I just thought, she was another character who was she was like all of these characters, they all reinvented themselves, which was something I found fascinating about Dempsey. He came up tough, dirt poor, literally went hungry, literally stuffed newspapers in his shoes, and he reinvented himself as a boxer and ultimately the heavyweight champion, and then many years later just a beloved public figure. But at the time of these fights, he was not a popular character because of this accusation of being a draft dodger. But all of them, Doc, Tex, Jack, and Nessa, had all recreated themselves. So she was born in the Midwest, and her name was not Nessa, and I actually can't remember what her original name was. And she went to New York and just became the woman she wanted to be. And because boxing was the it sport in the 20s, she wanted to be part of that whole scene. And so I thought, she has to be in the play. I mean, it's just too much a part of the fabric of this world. And I found it interesting too, as it was a sort of a cool way, I thought, this interloper into a man's world was another element of the play that that sort of pulled me in.